Welcome back to part 2 of Man is the Nigger of the World. Please go watch the first video to better get the John Lennon reference in regards to the title of this series that I'm doing now. And you know, the funny thing, or at least one funny thing about feminism, is that a lot of people today try to pigeonhole the entire movement into a conspiracy. It might sound familiar to you. And at the root of this conspiracy is obviously politics. In particular, Marxism or socialism, as if these political ghosts are somehow responsible for the mess we all witness today in regards to modern feminism. Now, I'm not going to outright disagree with these concepts. I mean, after all, the twain do meet somewhere in the middle, and they seem to go hand in hand. But remember, the intelligent man, the Mgtow man, he must consider cause and effect. The wise man, the Mgtow man, he must consider the difference between causality, correlation, and coincidence. Now, of course, in regards to feminism and conspiracy, there are some that like to quote from a very particular interview between the famous Hollywood director, Mr. Aaron Russo, and the infamous, well, you know him, Alex Jones. And in this interview, Mr. Russo says that he met with a Rockefeller family member and was told that feminism was funded by their family in order to tax the female half of the population and get the children outside of the family unit and indoctrinated into their education systems. Of course, this conspiracy, it does fit nicely into the popular history of women's suffrage back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And it does tie neatly with the conspiratorial bow of a dark Marxist plot. However, all of this tends to fall flat on its paranoid face once you travel anywhere outside of the Western world. And besides that, I don't think I would ever assume the words of a Hollywood director and this Alex Jones could be anywhere near the concept of truth. I mean, really, who can trust the words of the people that actually profit directly from their conspiracy theories? Okay, but regardless of that, I want you to take a look at what was said in that interview just for your own information and in case you missed it. I'll play it for you now. Here it goes.
Well, one of the things they told me was that he was at the house one night and he would talk and he started laughing. He said, "Aaron, what do you think women's liberation was about?" And I said, I had pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think it's about women having the right to work, getting equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote, you know? And he started to laugh. He said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why am I an idiot?" He said, let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded women's lib, you know? And we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation. He says, "And you want to know why?" He says, "There were two primary reasons." And they were, one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before women's lib. And the second reason was now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think. It breaks up the family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them. And so those are the two primary reasons for women's lib, which I thought up to that point was a noble thing. You know, when I saw their intentions behind it, where they were coming from when they created it, the thought of it, I saw the evil behind what I thought was a noble adventure. Well, see, the whole thing is these people control the money, so they make all the rules. You understand? And they put whatever rules they want into effect. And the truth is, America has really become a socialist, communistic country. And everybody says it's a capitalistic country. It's not a capitalistic country. You know, how can it be capitalistic when you have a central bank? That's the first. It can't be. You know,
It's a planned economy.
It's a planned economy. It's a phony. If they want to create prosperity, they just print dollars. They just make dollars. You don't have real prosperity.
Now, I believe Russo was right when he said America has become a socialist country and that the people with the money make the rules. But if one is to travel around the world, one will find that modern feminism is not an effect of socialist or Marxist connivings, but simply a ripe fruit that was ready to be plucked from the 1,000-year-old garden of gynocentric culture. Modern feminism is not a part of the disease of Marxism and socialism or communism or whatever you want to call it. Feminism, or more accurately what I like to name it, unempowered gynocentrism, is simply the side effect of men engineering the evolution of our human species through industry and the advance of technology. And alongside industry, obviously what followed is what we see today as modern politics. Before industry, we were ruled by feudalism, and queens ruled the land under the guise of kings. But industry and technology gave rise to a very specific freedom for both sexes from the shackles of traditionalism and gynocentrism, and thus was born feminism, but also was born modern politics, which not only included socialism, Marxism, communism, or capitalism, but it also included this new idea of the exchange of money that would represent the value of traded goods. In other words, thus began the birth of modern economics. And this is what we need to explore next. Now, in the last video, or the first part of this series, I introduced this concept through the mangina panderings of John Lennon and his "Woman is the Nigger of the World" song. But now let's translate this into not only politics, but also into the economics of the modern world that rest on the backs of men, and have always done so from the time of fire. And let's do this with sourced quotes, references, videos, and other places by other intelligent men. Now I want to share some video clips with you. And the first one, the main speaker, his name is Walter E. Williams. He was a brilliant economist, born in 1936, and also a black man who obviously lived through segregation in the Americas. And I think he might have a thing or two to say about political inequality disguised as equality. But for me, myself, the layman, what I tend to say in my own words is this: fuck you women and your only women train cars. Fuck you women and your only women parking spaces. And I guarantee you, Mr. Walter E. Williams, a black man who grew up with real segregation, would probably agree with me. Now, this video I want to share, it just represents a perspective, and it represents Mr. Williams' perspective. But it also, I believe, represents a perspective of most people, men and women, that have a sane mind and at least understand a small concept of how economics affect not only our business relations, but also our sexual relations, especially considering that we are a very highly evolved, sexually dimorphic mammalian species. So, without further ado, let's watch a little bit about what this brilliant man has to say.
Most people in this town view the state and a lot of the government programs, and you're making the argument in your writings for 30, 40 years, and in your book, that in fact policies like the minimum wage, the expansion of the welfare state, have actually been a setback for minorities. How do you defend yourself against your critics?
Well, if you look at the minimum wage, most Americans support the minimum wage and increase in the minimum wage because they have good intentions. They think that, gee, it will help low-skilled people earn higher living. But when you look at public policy, you should not look at the intentions behind public policy. You should ask the question, what are the effects? And you can see the effect of the minimum wage law if you put yourself in the place of an employer. And you say, and you have to pay $7.25 an hour to no matter whom you hire. Well then, would you hire a worker who is so unfortunate so as to have skills that would only enable him to produce $3 or $4 worth of value per hour? Well, most employers will look at that as a losing economic proposition. That is to pay somebody $7.25 when that somebody could only produce $4 worth of value per hour. And so the effect of the minimum wage law is to discriminate against the employment of low-skilled people. And if you look
But
at
wait a
our,
minute, those are the people who are going to get the minimum wage.
no, they're not going to get a job in the first place. That is, that there's the lowest skilled people, the employer just will not hire them. Now, in the absence of a minimum wage law, if he could pay them $3 or $4 an hour, $5 an hour, well, they could be employed and they would learn something on the job. They get on-the-job training and ultimately be worth $7.25 or even more than that. So what the minimum wage law does, it cuts off the bottom rungs of the economic ladder. And if you look for the empirical evidence of this, you just look at our labor force, and you see that the unemployment rate among teenagers is the greatest, is the highest. And teenagers are low skilled because they lack the experience and maturity and other attributes of adults. And among that group are black teenagers who not only share the handicaps of teenagers in general, but they share the additional handicaps of often going to rotten schools, getting fraudulent education, poor backgrounds, rotten neighborhoods, and early work experiences are very, very important for people who have this kind of background. Now, there's something else about the minimum wage law that nobody considers, and I point that out in a book I wrote in 1989. It's called South Africa's War Against Capitalism. And in that book, I do a study of labor markets in South Africa during its apartheid era. And I give citation after citation of racist unions in South Africa who would never have a black as a member, were the major supporters of minimum wage laws for blacks. And their stated reason was to make the wage high enough so that employers would not hire black workers, they would hire white workers. So it turns out that the minimum wage is the most effective tool in the arsenal of racists everywhere in the world. And let me just give one more example on minimum wage law. The first minimum wage law in our country was the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931. And the Davis-Bacon Act says that all workers in federally funded or federally assisted construction projects must be paid the prevailing wage. And if you look on page 6513 of the Congressional Record on March 31st, 1931, you'll see congressional testimony where congressmen will say, see that contractor over there? He brings cheap colored labor up from the South, puts them in cabins, and it's labor of that sort that has to compete, that white Americans are competing against. It was all kinds of testimony in support of the Davis-Bacon Act that demonstrated that they wanted to keep blacks out of construction. Wow. And see, the tragedy of it is that the Davis-Bacon Act is still on the books today. And another part of the tragedy is that black congressmen, they also support the Davis-Bacon Act. Now, they support the Davis-Bacon Act because unions want the Davis-Bacon Act. Now, the people who support the Davis-Bacon Act today, they just don't use the same rhetoric. They use a more enlightened rhetoric in support of the Davis-Bacon Act. But the minimum wage law, any kind of minimum or any kind of regulation on prices, it discriminates against less preferred people.